Hello students, this is chapter 1 and the title of this chapter is The Changing Family. Some of the objectives we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk about two important concepts, the sociological imagination and the sociological perspective. We're going to take a look at some various terms in sociology and also some family terms, and then we're going to finish up talking about some large scale or macro events that have changed the American family, for example, the Industrial Revolution, World War II, and some major historical social movements. First off, what is the sociological imagination? This is a concept that our perception of the world around us, or how we see the world around us, is really heavily influenced by our experiences, our biography, our story, the way that we were raised, the blessings of our lives, the traumas of our lives. So the reason the sociological imagination is important is to understand if we're going to study society and human behavior, we have to understand that not everybody looks at the world the way we do. That everybody looks through a different type of lens based on their experience, and one isn't necessarily right and the other one necessarily wrong. It's just different. So we have to be open to understand that other people may be perceiving something very differently than you are, and kind of being open to understanding that and not just assuming that, well, I see it this way, therefore they obviously see it that way. That's really not the case. We come from different cultures, we have different experiences, we come from different families, and so kind of being open to understanding that people see the world in very different ways is a critical step in understanding not only the discipline of sociology, but also understanding society and human behavior. The sociological imagination is kind of a step beyond the sociological imagination. And what it does, it calls us to question what we may perceive to be obvious, an obvious circumstance or situation. But sometimes we have to understand that we may be reading it wrong. There are circumstances that happen that we watch and we may assume something is happening, but until we get more information, we may realize that we're inaccurate, or we kind of jump the gun or prejudge. So this is an attempt for not only sociologists or sociology students, but just on a human level, to try to question what may be obvious and try to look at the world very open-mindedly, very objectively, very critically, to try to understand other lifestyles, other cultures. This doesn't mean that one has to necessarily agree with other lifestyles or other cultures. It's just that you're open to try to understand it on a deeper level. If you take a look at this photograph here, this is a man called Stanley, and he is considered, or he considers himself an adult baby. So he spends most of his day acting like a baby. So if you're looking at this through a critical lens, you would be wanting to know why. Why is he doing this? Is there something that has happened in his past? I mean, there's hundreds of questions that you could ask Stanley to try to figure out and understand how he became this individual that really experiences arrested development, where he's really not developed into adulthood and taken on the roles of being an adult. He's regressed to a point of wanting to act like a baby. And the real question is why, and being open to understanding that. So now let's go over some basic sociological terms. Sociology is the study of society, social groups, and institutions. Norms, these are rules of conduct, expectations of behavior, how you're supposed to act in social situations. We learn this from society, peer groups, but we also learn it from our families as well. Deviance is a violation of a norm, where if you deviate or you move away from what's expected of you, of your family or society, and that's referred to as deviance. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've committed a crime or done anything wrong. It's just that you've kind of deviated from what is expected. It could be politically, religiously, socially, culturally, a lot of different ways. Status is going to be your social position in society. For example, you are a college student, but you have a lot of different statuses. You may be a mother or a father, a son or daughter, an employee, a gamer, a basketball player, a musician, an artist. So these are the different titles that you may have. The roles are the expectations of those different titles. So as a student, which is your status, one of the roles of a student, or the expectations, is to complete assignments, to study, to learn, to be open-minded, and eventually get to graduation. So the status is the title. The role is the expectation. Society. When you see the term society, I want you to think first and foremost about people. These are the people that live in certain geographical areas, which means they live around each other and they share a common culture. Their culture could be their nationality, their language, their technology, their religion, their politics. So when you see society, I want you to think about the people. Now the next term is culture. This is what the people who make up the society actually share. So for example, part of their culture may be their particular language, their traditions, their norms, their laws, their technology, their fashion, their education, their political system. All of these are various cultural examples that a society shares. The next term is socialization. Socialization is the lifelong process where you're prepared to function in society as an adult. So socialization, where you basically are raised to be able to be independent, take care of yourself, possibly have children and raise them. Socialization begins with the family, and socialization begins at birth, from the moment you're born. So everything that you learn how to do from being a baby all the way to a young adult to be able to take care of yourself is the process of socialization and learning. And it even goes beyond young adulthood. I mean, throughout the entire course of our lives, we're constantly learning new things. We're constantly making mistakes, learning from those, and getting better and getting wiser. So, potty training, getting dressed, undressed, driving a car, balancing a checkbook, reading, writing, all these are examples of socialization, human socialization. The last term is called a social class. We have four major social classes in the United States. We have an upper class, the middle class, the working class, and the lower class. And what really separates those social classes is how much money that people make. So in future chapters, we're going to be talking more about the different social classes and how their lives are very, very different. So the definition of a social class is going to be groups of people with similar income ranges, with similar lifestyles and similar opportunities. So those with the most opportunities and the most money, the most connections, are going to be the upper class. And if we go all the way down to the lower class, they're going to have the least amount of life chances and opportunities, and they're more likely to experience poverty and possibly even homelessness. So now, let's take a look at some various family terms. The definition of family. These are going to be groups of people that are related to each other by blood, marriage, or adoption. They live together for a portion of their lives, and they are supposed to work in a cooperative manner. The nuclear family is going to be the day-to-day family that lives together. Typically includes a husband, wife, and kids, but it could be a single father with his children, a single mother with their children. It could be a couple that are married that do not have children at all. So there's a lot of variances there. When it comes to the extended family, these are going to be people outside of the nuclear family. So your grandparents, aunts and uncles, nieces, nephews, and cousins. You may see your extended family all the time if they live in the same town as you. You may see some of your extended family members maybe only once or twice a year, maybe at a graduation or a wedding, possibly funeral, or some sort of holiday. The next term is called a family of orientation. This is the family that you were born and raised in. So if you can imagine yourself being a child, being raised in that family on to adulthood, that is called your family of orientation. Your family of procreation, that is the family that you create whenever you are an adult, if you decide to start having children yourself. Whether you have biological children or foster children or you adopt children, this is family of procreation, where now you are the adult and you are raising children, but you are connected to both your family of orientation and also your family of procreation. Some norms of family authority. When you see authority, that means like power and decision making. So patry, when you see patry, you're going to see this term throughout the semester, and also matry, you're going to see this in various forms throughout the semester. So when you see patry, I want you to think about father, or P for papa. Archy is power. So patriarchy is the most common form of authority in the world. These are male-dominated societies where men have a higher status than women, where positions of power are pretty much exclusively for men. So their ability to work and to vote and make decisions over the family, that they're going to have more political power, more religious power, more cultural power. So you find this more in sometimes underdeveloped third world countries, but also in some countries that are not considered necessarily underdeveloped or third world. A lot of the Middle East, parts of Asia and Africa, and some various places in Central and South America would be more patriarchal. Matriarchy is going to be more of a female-dominated society, so this is a lot more rare than patriarchy. You may find this among some various tribes on the continent of Africa, but also some Native American tribes as well. So this is going to be where the females are going to have a higher status than the males. They'll have more position over the family, and they'll have more position and power over their children. But this is a rare form of family authority. The last one is known as egalitarianism. E for equality. So you're going to find this in most countries that are first world countries that are wealthy, educated, and democratic and highly technological, like the United States, Canada, Australia, and most of Western Europe. So a lot of these countries have gone through major social movements, women's movements, to bring about a lot more gender equality for women within those societies. So that doesn't mean that there aren't patriarchal families in the United States. It doesn't mean there's not matriarchal families in the United States. There are, actually. But the egalitarian part is more on a macro level. So if you were to truly compare an egalitarian society to a truly patriarchal society, they are very, very distinctive from each other. So let's take a look at some macro or large-scale events that have changed the American family. The Industrial Revolution has absolutely changed the American family. We went from an agrarian society where we were living off the land, building homes, growing our own crops, and then all of a sudden mechanization came in, the creation of things like the cotton gin and factories and mass production, the use of fossil fuels in order to have these assembly lines continuously run. So it created globalization where various countries, they start to buy and trade with each other. It created a global economy and different types of trade agreements. It created what's known as urbanization, the creation of cities and large cities and skyscrapers. A lot of Europeans started to migrate and come to the United States in order to have some freedoms and a better life. Home appliances started to be created. So instead of chopping firewood for your oven and using various pots or containers to hand wash your clothes and then go hang them up, you have gas ovens, electric ovens, wash machines, dryers later on, microwaves. So all of these appliances, it basically sped up the whole process of work that was at home. So prior to a lot of these appliances, a lot of women and mothers were needed to be home because this work took all day. It was a lot of work. So with the invention of a lot of these appliances that would do the work for them, this allowed a lot of women to leave the home, to go to college or a technical school or a university or to go to work. So it really started to bring about a lot more equality for women because there was just a lot more opportunities for women. The next major macro historical event would be World War II. So this significantly changed the American family. So during World War II, which was, it lasted from the end of the 1930s to the mid-1940s, The United States was pulled into World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and a lot of the U.S. soldiers were killed over there. And so whenever we were pulled into the Second World War, a lot of young men had to go overseas and fight. And so there was a huge need for the factories and the assembly lines to continue manufacturing the things that the United States needed in order to win World War II. And so it was considered women's patriotic duty to leave the house, to leave the kitchen, and to go into these factories and actually start to work. And a lot of women did. But what this did over a few years, it really started to empower women. They started to realize, well, I can be more than a homemaker. I don't have to stay home. I enjoy working. I enjoy making money. I enjoy having a say-so in the decisions. I enjoy paying the bills. And so this empowered women to realize that they could be more than just, a stay-at-home mom or a housewife. And ever since then, the two-income family has risen. So whenever World War II ended, a lot of these young men, they came back and they took their places back into these assemblies and assembly lines in these various places. And there were a lot of women that did go back home and become housewives and become homemakers, but there was some of these women that didn't. They decided that they wanted to be educated and that they wanted to have a careers, and so this even brought about even more gender equality and more egalitarianism here in the United States and also in the American home as well. The Lanham Act is a very unique type of social program that was only around for about 3 years during World War II. It ended right after World War II ended. The Lanham Act was the only time in American history where the United States had public daycares. So we have public education where it's a free education through tax revenue for kindergarten all the way through 12. And we have ABC programs and Head Start programs which are basically subsidized to be able to help lower income families have daycare so the parents can either go to college or go to work. But back then, the Lanham Act was public daycares, and so it was significantly reduced, if not free, for a lot of American families. And what this did, this allowed women to go work. If they had children under the age of 5 that were not ready for kindergarten, and there was an issue with them being able to afford daycare, which were a lot of times private pay. So with the Lanham Act, it subsidized, it took tax revenue to actually be able to pay for these daycares, and it allowed women to actually go into the workforce and also even to go to college as well. So this is the only time in American history for about 3 years that they had the Lanham Act. And like I said, whenever it ended, a lot of men came back. They wanted their positions at their place of employment, and there was a certain level of societal pressure for these women to leave work and actually go back home. Some did, some did not. Next, we'll take a look at some major social movements. A social movement is going to be a group of people that come together to promote a cause, and there have been several different social movements that have really kind of changed the American family pretty significantly. One is the women's movement. So the women's movement started in the 1840s, and one of its main objectives was to allow women to vote, but it also fought for equal pay. It fought for rights regarding divorce and child custody. It fought for rights of sports in K through 12, in college, to have equality in regards to funding for sports in education. So it fought for a lot of different things. So the right to vote, that came out in 1920. They were talking about it in the 1840s, but the right to vote came out in 1920. They fought for admittances into various colleges. There were a lot of colleges and universities that did not allow women into certain programs, and so they fought for equality there. And like I mentioned, also for equal pay. This came out in 1963. It's called the Equal Pay Act of 1963. So this also brought about more equality and egalitarianism to the American family and society. The Civil Rights Movement, this is predominantly during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and so one of its main fights was to end segregation. And so it did that through Brown versus Board of Education. It ended segregation, which is the separation of people based on their race or ethnicity. Brown versus Board of Education ended segregation in public schools. And then a decade later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in all public areas. So in the segregated South, where blacks and whites, they may use different areas of the restaurant, different restrooms, different water fountains. With the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it pretty much ended all of that. And then another thing they fought for too was interracial marriage. Interracial marriage in a lot of the northern states during the 1900s was legal, but most of the southern states did not allow it at all. And it wasn't until 1967 with the famous court case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, Loving versus Virginia, that, and if you take a look at this photograph here, that's actually the Loving family. That's Mildred Loving and that's Richard Loving. And so they sued the state of Virginia, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court in 1967. Loving versus Virginia passed. The Loving family won, and because of these two people here, interracial marriage became law of the land in 1967. And obviously that changed the American family. We have a lot of people that marry outside of their race or their ethnicity. They have that freedom now. Next we have the LGBTQ movement. Started primarily in the 1960s and 70s in places like California. And one of the main things that whenever the movement really kind of came out, they were encouraging people to kind of come out of the closet and stop hiding, come out to your family, come out to your friends, come out to your co-workers, kind of make yourself known. So, you know, they really pushed hard for more equality in the workplace, more acceptance of the alternative lifestyle, and then also marriage equality, which came about in 2015. So just like interracial marriage, the fight for that went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1967. Same-sex marriage also went to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it passed in 2015. So collectively, all these different social movements radically changed American society, but also the American family.